Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Shepheard-Walwyn podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Brown. Now, today we have a very special guest, a multi-million selling author, an insider turned whistleblower on the world's biggest economic scam. But amazingly, most people have never heard of him. So before we start the podcast, I want to introduce him, because once you understand what he did and what's still going on, you'll see it everywhere. Now, John Perkins, by his own confession, was an economic hitman, a person who does to economies what real-life hitmen do to people. Here's how the game works. You find a poorer country with something that you want. It could be oil, minerals, a strategically important coastline. You lend it fortunes for massive infrastructure projects. It could be dams, power plants, railways, anything with the promise of dramatically speeding up economic development. It looks like generosity, but the money always flows back to the country giving the loan, and the loans are designed to be unpayable, which means that the nation starts to drown in debt, which makes them much more amenable to taking advice on how to vote at important gatherings like the UN or the World Bank, stuff like that. And then they have to be amenable to where to have a military base or who to give their resources to, because now the collateral gets called in. And leaders who refuse this, leaders like Roldos and Torrijos in Central and Southern America, well, they die in remarkably convenient plane crashes when the economic hitman gets exchanged for a genuine hitman. Now, this isn't conspiracy or Hollywood. It's documented history told by one of the men who ran it. Now, John has been interviewed by many people, so I decided to do something differently to draw attention to his ideas. In the interview that you're about to see, I asked John to imagine that I am going to be the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And his job as an economic hitman is to coach me how to win power and bury my own people in debt for my own gain. Now, I do want this podcast to be different and entertaining, so I do hope you find it funny. But underneath the comedy is deadly serious machinery that still shapes our world. Here's the part that should give you pause. John's new book, The Art of the Steal, that's out in September, reveals that the techniques of the economic hitman and their tactics are no longer something that they do for distant, poorer nations. The tactics have come home. The same playbook, the manufactured fear, the crushing debt, the divide and conquer, the anxiety over insufficiency, everything now is being run inside the developed world itself. It's in America, it's in the UK, it's in the EU, it's everywhere across the world. The predators have come home and turned on their own people, turned on us. So enjoy the joke and then remember the truth sitting inside it and start looking for the techniques being used on you and have a think about what you can do to help stop it. I really hope you enjoy the interview and do check out John's work. Oh, and if you like it, please do like and subscribe. It really helps us get these messages out. This is getting really important. Today we have a very special guest. It's John Perkins, the original economic hitman. John's an author of over a dozen books now, both in economics, such as Confessions of an Economic Hitman, The Secret History of the American Empire, and Hoodwinked. But he's also done a whole series of books about how to create what he describes as a life economy, using the wisdom of the people of South America, such as the Shah tribe, who he's been visiting since the 1960s. John, absolutely just a massive welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be with you, Jonathan. I'm looking forward to it.
So, John, right now we've got quite a bit of leadership turmoil here in the UK, and I just thought I'd put myself forward for election using the insights and wisdom you learned as an economic hitman. I just wondered if we could start off with what you describe as the 4 pillars of the economic hitman. If I wanted to get elected for power, how would I put those to work?
I think the first thing is fear. So the 4 pillars are fear, debt, anxiety over scarcity, and divide and conquer. and fear. You want to make your country fearful. You convince everybody that it's a terrible, terrible situation that England's in. Everything's falling apart. Nothing's working. Everybody's on the verge of starving to death. If you can convince them of that, housing a horrible issue. Health care has gone down the sewer. The education system's terrible. Everything's terrible, and you can fix it. And you're the only one who can fix it. In other words, you want to plant fear in people, even if it's totally unjustified. It doesn't matter. And with the idea that you can fix it. And you're the only one who can fix it. You can bring this country back to power. You can bring it back to the ancient era of England ruling the waves, ruling the world. Yes, we want to be an empire again. That's what we want.
We could make Britain great again, right?
Make Britain great again, absolutely. And it's a good thing we got a relationship with Europe that we had before, because now this gives us the opportunity to go ahead and pace Europe. We can conquer Europe. Let's conquer Europe, because war is a good thing. You know, that's another way to win elections is you want to have a war, Jonathan. You want to create a war someplace in the world, because when you create a war, you have all kinds of excuses to institute powers that you wouldn't otherwise have. At least, you know, that's the case in the United States and many countries, the executive power during times of emergency. So you want to have a war. You can hope for some devastating ecological event, huge tsunami that sweeps in from the United States in retaliation for 250 years ago, perhaps. Maybe the United States has this machine that can actually set off. What a spectacular way for us to celebrate the 4th of July here in the United States would be to just smother the British Isles in a huge tsunami. And we might have a machine that could do that. And so convince the people that this is something to be afraid of. And we should prepare for these sorts of things here in England. And you're the person to do it. You know, you can bring everybody together to have a consensus that this is the time to make England great again.
I mean, first of all, I think you must have been reading our newspapers, John. I honestly do. You said before we came on air that you don't know much about the UK, but that's exactly the situation that everybody's seeing right now, in that the UK's falling apart, education's falling apart, the whole thing. So someone has been taking somebody's consultancy, if not yours. I'm wondering if we need to have someone that I can blame for the problem. So should I blame the EU or Donald Trump or some other group that I can pick on? Picking a fight with the EU sounds like a good thing as long as we don't actually go to war, because we don't have an army anymore. I'd rather keep that away from the public eye. Is that the kind of thing that we ought to be doing?
Absolutely. Go to war with everybody. Don't forget China. I mean, you got to get China in there too. And the whole world is against us. And that's not the way it used to be. It used to be that Britain was the world leader in everything, everything. And now it's time to make England great again. And you know, MEGA, isn't that wonderful? So MEGA, and you can use it. You can have a wonderful phrase line here: meager, not meager. MEGA, in other words, we've been meager. We haven't lived up to our potential. Now is the time to no longer be meager, be MEGA. I don't know. Yeah. Whatever comes up, you know, the important thing is whatever you use, just keep repeating it, repeating it, repeating it, repeating it, and how important it is. And that you are the only one who can resolve these problems.
Yeah.
Nobody else can do it.
And so anxiety over insufficiency. That's another important thing of the
Oh,
economic hitman. So
yeah.
any suggestions on how I apply that?
Well, that just fits in here. It's to say that we don't have enough, we don't have good education, we don't have enough nutrition, we don't have enough good health care, we don't have enough. And don't forget, you mentioned that you don't have an army. Well, that's terrible. You need to have a huge army, you know, so you don't have enough protection. And the United States is withdrawing from protecting everybody around the world except Israel. England needs protection. You're insufficient in just about everything. And don't forget that you're insufficient in reputation. The world doesn't look toward England for anything anymore. I mean, you can lie
Well, I
about
mean,
that. I got to say at this point, Jonathan, everything I'm saying is not true. I have a tremendous respect. And I've always thought maybe the United States would be better off if England had won the Revolutionary War. We'd be like Canada or Australia. I'm a loyal American, so I'm not allowed to say that. My family fought in the American Revolution. But we're not doing so well in this country. And Australia and Canada, I think, are doing a lot better. Anyway, that's aside. The point is, you can really believe in your heart whatever you want, but you've got to convince the people.
so if I think about, let's do some focus groups, find out what people are more worried about. Are they more worried, for example, about European bureaucrats? Are they more worried about Donald Trump being crazy? Are they more worried about migrants and immigrants or people from a different religion? And I think if I looked at that and then I can start focusing on, so, but what I need is an opponent or an enemy to create fear and then a cause for any sense of insufficiency that we may or may not have.
Yeah, remember, you don't have to be consistent. You can keep changing what it is you're fearful of. One of our great writers here in the United States said consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. You don't have to be consistent. You can keep going after different groups. Today, it can be the Europeans who are the enemy, and tomorrow it can be the Americans. And and the day after tomorrow could be Cape Verde Island because they're threatening to win the World Cup, and that would be a huge disappointment for a country like England to see a little island country of about 500,000 people win the World Cup. So they're another enemy to consider.
Essentially,
But
yeah. Yeah.
if they can win the World Cup, they've probably got nuclear missiles also. I mean, there's no reason not to believe that. But
Rumors as well, John.
you, yeah, you might want to consider taking them over, making them part of the empire. Like the United States has wanted
Cape
to do with
Cape Verde,
Canada.
frankly, seems more realistic than the whole of Europe right now. I think Cape Verde is more like a reclaiming the Falkland Islands. I am thinking of Margaret Thatcher when she had her little war down in down in the 1980s. Now the other thing, so we've got fear, we've got anxiety over insufficiency, and we've also got debt. So I promise prosperity that I can't pay for. Um, but how do I get my people both personally indebted, and dependent enough that they're not going to vote against me?
Well, I think there's a couple of factors here. One is that debt, to remember that debt is about loyalty as much as money. So how do you make people indebted to you? And Trump is another great model in that way, that it seems as though the whole Republican Party and the Supreme Court are somehow indebted to Trump. We're not quite sure how, other than the fact that he destroys reputations. And if anybody who stands against him when they run an election, he stands against them, and that they seem to win these days. So that is not just about money, but it would be good also if, for example, you could get Cape Verde to borrow a lot of money from you. You could promise your construction companies, your architects are the best in the world for building soccer stadiums. There's no question about it. I mean, Britain has this long history of soccer stadiums, and wonderful ones, the beautiful ones. Of course, they're falling apart now. You need to fix them too in Great Britain. But your architects know how to design and build them in places like Cape Verde. So lend Cape Verde a lot of money and put them deep into debt, build them a soccer stadium and get them in debt to you. But also, you want to put England deep, deep, deep into debt. The United States today, we're deep into debt. And Donald Trump has been such a great model for this because Donald Trump goes so deep into debt that the banks have to keep bailing him out. They can't go after him. He's too big to fail, like the banks were after the recession. But he's done an amazing job with his casinos in Atlantic Beach, where he's gone hugely into debt. They've failed. They went bankrupt. But he managed to keep his name on them and to keep making profits from them. And the banks kept pouring more and more money into them and other real estate deals that he did because they couldn't let him fail. Because if he failed, they would they would lose a hell of a lot of money, and he would make them look very bad in the press also.
So it's not just that I want people to be tied to my success. They need to be punished if I fail. So if I go down, they go down as well. right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
brilliant.
and of course, Netanyahu is a great example of that, also in Israel. But also, you can put England into debt, so that
Well,
so that
we
the world.
already are. I mean, John, honestly, I thought this was a clever idea, but someone's clearly been taking advice because we also have enormous debts. Well,
Deutsche Bank is the one that Trump owed a lot of money to, and they just kept pouring more and more money into him. So, get the Germans, get the French, get all the European banks to put a lot of money into England, and then refuse to pay it.
I like that bit. We've got fear over insufficiency or insecurity. We've got debt, and then we've got divide and conquer just to keep everybody off balance.
Yeah.
So, any suggestions on how I use that for keeping people as factions or creating factions when there aren't any, um, and then making sure that I'm the one who has the power?
Yeah, stir up a lot of controversy. Make people bad people that other people won't believe that really are bad people. Like all those immigrants from Cape Verde.
God, I never liked people from Cape Verde. They seemed just suspiciously friendly and open. I'm thinking to myself, what the hell are you after, Cape Verde?
Yeah, 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 and they're trying to infiltrate your soccer teams too. I mean, you take Manchester, you take any of the soccer teams, and now Cape Verde is going to try to infiltrate them, and then you'll have people that defend them, and that's good. You want to have that divide and conquer. So you want half of England to be for Cape Verde and half to be against. And even then, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Is it Cape Verde or is it Cape Verde? And that can be a very controversial item too. You can make a big deal out of the way that well, you guys pronounce it wrong. You're insulting these people. And let's not forget all the other, as Trump has already defined these other countries as shithole countries. So keep emphasizing that you're getting a lot of immigrants from some of these countries too. And some of the Europeans that come into England, like, oh, some of them come across as fun-loving. The Italians, they bring in their wine, they bring in their cheese. Do you think they're having a lot of fun? But what they're really doing is destroying the culture of England.
The coffee
Oh,
tastes nice. The food
oh my
tastes delicious. What are they trying to do? They're just embarrassing us. How am I
Exactly.
doing? How am I doing?
They're destroying pub food. I mean,
We
it's
have
pubs.
proud traditions, John, of tasteless
God,
food in this country, and here they come with their deliciousness and their Italian herbs and spices, their basil and tomato salad. I mean, what the
oh,
hell's that about? With
oh my
mozzarella
God.
cheese, it's delicious. So what's wrong with the old? We don't have lettuce anymore. It's now have to be rebranded iceberg, but that's again, we can be against iceberg lettuce eaters. They're suspect. Probably came from Cape Verde.
Well, let's not forget Iceland. Now, Iceland is on the rise. Probably iceberg lettuce comes from Iceland. And because like Iceland is really, they're trying to reinstitute the Viking mentality of really occupying the British Isles. But they know they can't do it with their longboats anymore. They have to do it through lettuce. Let's watch out for those Icelandic people. They don't even, you know what? The Norwegians, the Swedes, other people that come out of the Viking heritage, they can't even understand Icelandic language because the Icelandic people still speak the language of the ancient Vikings and they can read
They
the
really?
manuscripts. I was in Iceland recently and I went into this museum where this guy read to me right out of one of these things. He said, nobody else can do this because we are the true Vikings. Well, that sends a message, doesn't it?
It
We
does.
are the
Yeah, yeah.
true Vikings. And what did the Vikings do to England? I need to say no more.
You don't. You don't. We can attack all the Vikings and stuff. I actually lived on a street growing up, and the local pub was called the Vikings. How about that for a personal connection? So that
Uh,
makes me the only person who can fight them because I've grown up with them. It
yeah,
happened to have been a
exactly.
pub, happened to have been a pub, and it wasn't a real person. But I've always thought about how I would defeat the Vikings even as a child. I've been raised for this job all my life, thanks to this threat from the iceberg lettuce from Iceland and the original Vikings, and me growing up on a street where the Vikings pub was the only place to drink. So, John, John, let's fast forward a little bit. I've taken your advice and I've been elected. Now my mission is to make myself and my friends as rich as possible. I think you're the man to advise me on this.
Yeah.
We're going to get everybody into debt, right? But how did the loans that you issued as an economic hitman, How did they work? What was the structure of them, and how did you always guarantee that the money would come back to your country?
Well, resources were the collateral. Whatever the resource was that we wanted, could be oil. Today it could be lithium. Let's see, what could it be for people within England?
Well, I mean, obviously, so just to be clear, John, it's obviously the United Kingdom of Great Britain, including England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland.
Yeah, they are the British Isles. Yes.
So,
What?
so I wouldn't want our, I don't know how many Scottish listeners we've got or Welsh. I am actually part Welsh as well. We've got lots of oil. We've still got
It's
oil.
not, you've really touched upon something here. Is that this traditional animosity between the Scots and the Irish and the Welsh and the English?
Yeah, there
You
is.
know,
Yeah, yeah.
oh, and you go back to the time of the Saxons and the Normans. I mean, this is tremendous as far as the getting back to the divide and conquer. That's tremendous as far as that's concerned. But getting back to the resources, you might want to consider introducing something like in schools and throughout the British Islands, in schools, uh, everybody should wear Scottish kilts. And that'll really piss off the Irish and the Welsh and the English for that matter. Make mandatory. And then you're going to loan a lot of money. You're going to lend a lot of money to Scotland in order to increase their production of kilts and bagpipes also. Those pubs have to have bagpipes. And so this is going to become mandatory. You could enforce this with a law of some sort that they have to play the British anthem before every evening at every pub throughout the British Isles, and it has to be done with bagpipes, and everybody has to be wearing kilts. And now, by lending Scotland money in order to increase their production of bagpipes and kilts, they've got to go into deep, deep, deep debt. And that's where you want them, because when you've got a country or part of your own country in debt to you, you got them. You've hooked them. You've got them by the I probably can't use that word on
The
a
sporran. We've got them by
program.
the sporran.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever the hell that means. Yes.
They wear it at the front of their kilts.
Oh,
So that's
there you
the
go.
that's the
You've got it.
I'm just wondering, is there a way that I could, if we had, let's just say we get them to take on loans, but they're not producing enough fabric, could I then get my friends to set up factories in England to create tartan for the kilt, and I paid my friends rather than paying the country? That would be consistent with being an economic hit, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think also to make sure that you've got to have some other options here too. So, for example, you're expecting some pretty hot weather this year in the British Isles, aren't you? I think
Well,
this
we've had
summer.
our hot week
Yeah.
in Britain, but there's a chance there could, I think it could even get up to 85 again next week. So that's pretty scorching for us.
Yeah. Well, you need ice. You need ice. And who's got ice? Iceland. Iceland. And it's got these huge glaciers. They're melting. They're losing their glaciers. I just saw a movie last night about that, a magnificent movie made by an Icelandic guy about the glaciers. So this is a resource that's like oil today that's going into the decline. So they need to take advantage of those glaciers before they lose them by chopping off huge hunks of them and sending them to England. And that's the collateral. So you lend Iceland a lot of money. You put them deep, deep, deep into debt. And the collateral is their ice, because you need their ice. Let's face it. You need their ice.
Genuine glacial ice,
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
increasingly scarce commodity.
Pure. Pure.
Brilliant. So
Nature's own.
we give people loans, get them into debt, and if possible, we make sure that if the loan does get spent in the country, we have our friends getting the money, or we spend the money in our country and then make it look as if the money's going to them. So, for example, if you're running an infrastructure project, it goes to English companies rather than Scottish companies or Welsh companies or Irish companies.
Make sure the companies they go to it's a no competition. It's a no bid operation. You, the president or the prime minister, you choose.
We're in a hurry, John, so I need to move fast.
Absolutely,
If we are
absolutely.
gonna if we are gonna have a kilt in every home, and every pub and some bagpipes, then we have to move fast. So we don't have time for these things.
And you're going to
I
pay,
mean,
the schools are going to pay premium rates. So a kilt that might have cost $200, they're going to probably have to pay 400 for it. But that's okay. That's okay because the company is owned by one of your friends.
yes,
So,
yes,
and he's an honest guy. He's a nice fella. He's a nice fella. He's a good person. And
yes,
that's
yes,
so it's
he is. You
okay.
know him. You know him.
Yes, I do. Yes, he's wonderful. He's
So,
excellent.
so, so, John, obviously, with all this going on, our GDP is going to go up. But just
Uh,
confidentially, I've read that you see GDP as a really poor statistic, and it causes a lot of damage. And it was a friend of yours or a leader in Panama who pointed this out to you.
yeah. Well, that's from the standpoint of the people. GDP per capita, the people think that measures how well they're doing. Like, okay, the people per capita, that must mean us. But we all know that that's just not true. GDP, gross domestic product, measures how well the wealthy are doing and the big corporations. The little guys hardly even included in it for that matter. And so GDP per capita is simply that huge number divided by the number of people is meaningless as far as we the people are concerned. So my argument in my books is from the standpoint that we the people are being screwed by this concept of GDP. But when you're prime minister, you want GDP to continue to increase. First of all, because that means your friends are making a lot of money because they're the ones who are being recorded in GDP. And second of all, because it looks good. It's a great deceptive. GDP is one of the greatest ways of statistical lying in the world. And it's not actually a lie because these numbers really are increasing, but the way it's presented is a tremendous political tool for you to use and make a lot of money in the process. And as we're getting into this, Jonathan, also you need to create your own kind of Bitcoin. Uh,
But you
you
know,
know,
I saw the numbers on that
just
just today, John,
yes,
and
one
and I know of
1.4 billion.
an inspirational leader close to both of us, and goodness me, the money made. Donald Trump, ladies and gentlemen, and Donald Trump's tax return came out for his first year in office, and he actually made his wealth increase by over $1 billion. And I think nearly 600 million of that was, or even a billion actually, combined was from cryptocurrencies. Um,
No. 1.4 billion.
was it really?
Yes, the 600 million figure usually was last year. His total last year was 600 million. This year his total is 2.2 billion, of which 1.4 billion is crypto. So so that's something for you to
I aspired, I dream of.
aspire to.
So
And a lot of the other part of that 2.2 billion came from hotels and services that he's forced other countries to take on, or golf courses, and visiting dignitaries have to stay in his hotels at premium rates, and they're happy to pay these premium rates because they know that's a bribe. Oh, I'm sorry, they know that that's fair because these are good hotels. They're
you
excellent.
know,
They're luxury
John,
hotels.
honestly, I used to have Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton's barbecue as my inspiration, but I'm clearly not going far enough. I don't know if you know the numbers on. Bill would charge $250,000 for a barbecue with Bill, and his wife Hillary, the then secretary, happened to be present by pure coincidence. The barbecue stopped the moment she left office. I thought that was inspirational, but goodness me. And so if someone complains about not being richer or not feeling that I've done a good job, I point to GDP, and even sometimes I can point to GDP per capita. The GDP used to be a decent-ish number. If wealth went up in the country, everybody else got wealthier. Has it always been this bad? Has it just been more, it's just got worse as society's got less fair?
Well, I became an economic hitman in 1970, 71, and I don't remember before that. It's possible before that, maybe under Franklin Roosevelt. He had a knack for becoming rather authoritarian. So he's another model you could look to, producing these huge programs to make people work, to give people work by the government paying them to work. But the difference would be, in the case of Roosevelt, as far as we know, he didn't benefit personally from this. You want to make sure you benefit personally from this because you deserve it. You get to be prime minister. You're running the most important country in the whole world, and you deserve to put aside enough money so that you can, when you have to retire, and you want to live decently when you retire, and your family
John,
wants to live
John,
decently.
if we don't stop Cape Verde and Iceland, I ask you who will? Hmm? Who will?
Exactly.
Who will?
Exactly. Who will? And and the other thing you want to do is to use this Franklin Roosevelt approach of putting people to work. You want to totally redo the capital city. You want to put up arches, and you might want to completely redirect the Thames River, or at least reline it so that it has reflecting mirrors along its banks.
It's been wonky for a very long time. I don't know if you've seen the River Thames, but it just meanders. Old Father Thames
It's disgusting. It's
has been
disgusting. I mean,
riding out on his reputation for way too long, and it's time he was brought into line, literally
it's
as well as metaphorically. John, there's talking about inspiration. There was as an economic hitman and as an aspiring leader, you did some work in Saudi Arabia. I just wondered if you could take us through the Summer project. I think there was a quote that it was something that would keep paying for itself, or it would the cow we can milk until the sun sets, with the phrase on that. What was SAMA and why was it such an important project the economic hitmen of the world?
Well, SAMA, first of all, it represents Saudi Arabia money laundering affair. And it was in the early 70s that the United States had gone through a terrible recession, really a depression. And we were worried that it was going to get bigger because of OPEC stopping the production of oil, because of the role the United States had played in helping Israel in the wars in the Middle East at that time. And Saudi Arabia was by far the leader of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which had tremendous power. The U.S. Treasury Department came to me and I guess a few others and said, hey, we got to stop Saudi Arabia from being in that kind of a position where it has so much power. So I go off to Saudi Arabia and with this mandate to somehow put Saudi Arabia in a position where they would be beholden to us and where we could get back some of the money they were making off their petrodollars and make sure that we had control over them. It's a funny story, Jonathan. I had heard about this herd of goats in the streets of Riyadh, and I get to Riyadh and I see them. And there's this herd of goats that's wandering through the streets of Riyadh eating garbage. And it was a very smelly affair. You didn't want to get too close to these goats, but they were fun to watch. I like goats. I think goats are very playful and they're fun animals. And you know what? The goat might not be a bad symbol for you to have as a prime minister because the goats, it's fun, it's funny, they're sweet, but they can also be pretty damn rough. And perhaps more importantly than anything else, they eat garbage. And so, in the case of Saudi Arabia, they're wandering through the streets eating garbage. And I asked one of the Saudi officials, "What's the story with these? You're the wealthiest country in the world per capita, again measured. It's a small population. And you don't have a garbage collection system." And he looks at me and he says, "Well, no self-respecting Saudi would pick up garbage. That's why we have goats doing it." And I said, but that must be very embarrassing to you. It should be embarrassing. We'll make sure it's embarrassing. I'll get the word out. That's what you're doing. The wealthiest country in the world per capita. You brag about this, it goes. So instead, let me help you put together a deal with a big international garbage collection company. And they can come in here and you can use your petrodollars. They'll be an American company, of course. You can pay them for getting rid of your garbage. And in the end, what we came up with was this plan where Saudi Arabia would return all of its petrodollars to the U.S. to buy Treasury securities. And the U.S. Treasury Department would be able to use the interest, which over the years has amounted to trillions of dollars, use the interest to hire U.S. corporations to modernize Saudi Arabia, which really meant westernize Saudi Arabia. And
Amazing.
we would also expect that the Saudis would never increase the price of oil or limit the production of oil, except as the oil companies agreed to. And they would always use the US dollar, which was in a free float at that time, because in 1971, Nixon had taken the dollar off the gold standard. So they'd have to use the US dollar. So the US dollar now is on the petroleum standard. And In return, we in the United States would protect the House of Saud under all circumstances, which we've done. When Iraq threatened to attack both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, we went to war with Iraq and we eventually took out the leader. We also made sure that when no planes could fly in the United States after 9/11, the only planes that flew were ones that took the members of the royal family of Saudi Arabia, the House of Saud, out of the United States for whatever reason. It's never been proven, but we did things like that. And remember when this guy Khashoggi
Khashoggi, yeah.
was assassinated, and it was pretty obvious that that was under the commands of the House of Saud. We protected him. They,
Amazing. John, if I'm picking people to be part of my group, how did you assess? And also, I understand you were assessed as well for this. Is how do I know that I would be able to own those people? What do I need to look for in terms of predilections or habits or tendencies? How do I make sure that they stay loyal to me?
well, first you want to make sure that they've guaranteed that they will be loyal to you. They have to make that promise before you hire them, bring them into office. And you want to have a lot on their personal background, the infidelities they've had in their marriages, the money they've made on the side. It doesn't matter if you've been doing something similar, but you want to have that on them. The times they've spoken badly about you or anybody else to kind of, I don't like to use the word blackmail. And then at the same time, you strike fear into their hearts. Like, my God, if you're not loyal to me, you'll never get anywhere in the world. I'll see to it that you're destroyed. And some people like Trump can come right out and say that to someone. They can say, I will see that you are destroyed if you don't come around. I will take you down. And he started this on his television program by you're fired.
Hmm.
But you can also be a little bit more subtle about it. That's how I was
We
when
do. We
when I
prefer to be subtle in Britain. We do have our Alan Sugar, who's an economy version of Donald Trump, but we prefer to be more subtle in Britain, I think. So I would prefer perhaps not to make the threats myself and just have others do it, or just to leave silences. We're very good with silences in Britain, I think.
well, that's what I used too. I was subtle. So I would sit in the president's office and I would say, hey, if you accept this deal, you and your family are going to make a lot of money off this because we're going to build a big electrical system and you and your family own industries that use a lot of electricity. And you're going to really benefit from the electricity here. But plus my firm's a Boston firm. We've got really good connections with all these incredible universities in Boston. And we'll make sure that all your kids and all your friends and all your cronies' kids get into one of these colleges. And we personally, my company will give them full scholarships and pay all their expenses. That's worth a lot of money, especially if you happen to be the leader of a country in Africa or Latin America. And if you don't play our game, if you don't play our game, you know, I would, did you happen to read that book about how Salvador Allende in Chile was taken out? There was a coup against him and he died in the process. A terrible thing. Something similar happened to Lumumba in the Congo and Diem in Vietnam and Mossadegh in Iran. My God, I've just been reading this book, Mr. President. I don't know. Have you read this book? I'll get you a copy of this book. But some of these leaders, I just can't believe what happened to them, you know, and none of them were really good friends of the United States. They didn't play our game. But we were very, very sad when these things happened to them. It was disappointing to us. But unfortunately, Mr. President, they do happen. And so
Oh,
you know, I'll get you a copy of that book.
John Perkins, you still got it, mate. I'm like, oh my God, John, where do I sign? Where do I? That's exactly the approach. That's going to go down very well in Britain because that still works. That just the whole, we'd really miss you. Would be. I love the thing that you were sorry when they were gone. It's, goodness me.
I'll tell you what good story, Jonathan. My first assignment, I was a really young man and very naive, and I'd been trained by this woman, Claudine, so I knew what I was supposed to do. I was sent off to Indonesia. This is in 1970, 71. And I set off to Indonesia, and Indonesia is very important to the United States at that time because a lot of oil had just been discovered there. It controlled the Strait of Hormuz. It controlled very important waterways that connected the Atlantic and the Pacific, basically, the China Sea and the Indian Ocean and so forth. They controlled them, not to mention the fact that it had the most Muslims in the world per square mile. And it was being threatened. We knew that we were losing the war in Vietnam, and we were afraid of the domino effect that if the communists took over Vietnam, then they would move down throughout Southeast Asia, and Indonesia would be a prime target. So we had to take control. That was my job, to get control of Indonesia. I'm this young guy who really doesn't know what he's doing. He knows what he's supposed to do, but I haven't had any experience in this kind of thing. I'd come out of the Peace Corps where I'd been in the jungles of Ecuador. I'd been to business school, but other than that. And so I'm sitting in the Hotel Indonesia bar when the best hotel in town, obviously. That's where we stayed, Intercontinental. And a guy from the embassy has invited me out to dinner. And now we're sitting in the bar, and he was the commercial attaché. That's what his card said. And I later would discover that those were usually CIA agents. But he says to me, you've just told me that you're really nervous about your meeting with the Minister of Finance tomorrow of Indonesia. Why are you nervous? And I said, well, geez, this guy knows what he's doing. He knows the lingo. I gotta admit to you that we've had a few drinks. I'm really being open. I gotta admit to you, I don't know what to say. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't think I'll even understand what he's saying. And so this guy from this embassy says, well, John, if you don't understand what he's saying, just kind of rub your chin, roll your eyes, look at the ceiling, and say, yes, that's very, very interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more? Go into some more detail about that. That's so interesting, Mr. Minister. And he says, just don't ever admit you don't understand or you don't know. Always
Right.
fake it. Fake it till you make it,
I'm going to save that for press conferences.
I use it all the time now. In fact, you haven't asked me any question yet that I felt insecure with, but if I do, you won't know it. You
Got
won't
it.
know that I'm feeling insecure.
I might have
I'll
an
get the,
idea now when you
I'll get,
tell me it's an interesting question and
I'm a
you
good,
want me to tell you more.
I'm a good magician. The point is to make you answer your own question the way you want it answered. So then I can just parrot that back at you.
Exactly. Now, John, I'm just thinking just about our journey through your coaching as me as with an economic hitman. Um, does this machine actually last, or will it eventually eat the man running it?
Well, Jonathan, what do you think?
That's a very interesting question, John. Tell me more about that.
Well, I'm just thinking that you know Britain a lot better than I do. And I think it's a fascinating approach that we've been outlining for you here, and I think the question now comes to you is with what you know about the British people and the whole electoral system there and the government system there, do you think it'll work? And tell me what points you think will work and what ones you think might be a little bit, iffy.
That's a great question, John. I'm going to need to think about that.
Wait,
Um,
that was
I'm actually
that was an answer.
No, like that a
Yes.
lot. Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to go and I'm gonna have to go and think about my whether I employ you as an economic hitman. Um,
Well, wait a minute. Do you remember so a couple of your predecessors didn't. And you know what happened to them, right?
yeah, I do.
Yeah.
They got massive contracts. They set up foundations and they became multimillionaires. Are they the ones we're talking about?
No, they're the ones that did listen to me.
Oh, okay. Then
The ones that didn't listen to me, well, I think some of them are living in Iceland.
and we're gonna get to them as well as the ones in Cape Verde.
Yeah, and maybe a few of them living, I don't know, Cuba, Republic of the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo. I don't know where they are, but you don't see them around anymore.
You don't. You don't, that's
Oh,
true. And
yeah.
unfortunately for the UK, we do see most of our prime ministers around, which would suggest that they did listen to you or your predecessors.
There
Um,
you go. And they're living well, aren't they?
very, very well.
There
Now,
you go.
I guess the
That's
difference is that as we're seeing now, and certainly in the COVID years, our politicians started making money whilst they were in office rather than when they'd left. I think previously almost all leaders had the courtesy to make massive amounts of money after they'd left office rather than during. That now seems to be changing. Um, John, if I was a leader and I genuinely wanted to adopt the lessons that you've learned since ceasing to be an economic hitman, and when you return to South America to spend time with indigenous tribes and communities, and an earlier part of the conversation, we've been talking about what you describe amounts to the death economy. If I was a leader of a country and I wanted to create a life economy of to create genuine prosperity for my people, and let's just say I am genuinely public minded and care about my country, and by some extraordinary quirk of fate, I end up in power, having got through all the assessment areas, or the not assessment centers, but just the greasy poles and everything else, and I actually make it through with my integrity intact. Where would I start as a leader applying not the lessons from Confessions of a Hitman, but it's in your words, how do we create the country as we dream it?
yeah.
And what
Yeah. So that's a very good question, Jonathan. The book I wrote before the third of the trilogy of Confessions of an Economic Hitman was a book called Touching the Jaguar, which is about lessons I learned from indigenous people in primarily in South America, Latin America, also Central America. Uh, and not from so much from the political leaders of South America or Latin America, it's from the indigenous leaders. And I want to say to start off with that, like all people, indigenous people, some of them are wonderful, some of them are wife beaters or murderers or sociopaths. And so it's not that I idealize indigenous people as individuals, because there's all kinds, they're human beings. What I idealize is that they believe that they should live as part of nature, part of the world, whereas we believe that we are a part from and supreme over nature. And that's a huge distinction. So within that general philosophy, they have a life economy because they believe they are a part of nature. They're not supreme over it. They have to live with it. And if anything, make it better, nurture it. And so the life economy is really about that. It takes us from the opposite, the death economy, which we currently have, which is polluting and consuming itself toward extinction, is based on a goal of maximizing short-term consumption materialism and maximizing short-term profits for corporations. Now, I want to be clear, corporations need to make a profit. Businesses need to make a profit. But through historically, and when I was in business school, I wasn't taught that you maximize your short-term profits. You make short-term profits, but you maximize what you do to create a future that's viable for you and your children and grandchildren. And that means you put some of the money, some of the profits your business makes back into the business, or to paying your employees, to giving them pension funds and retirement insurance, to making sure your suppliers are doing well. You're not trying to downbid your suppliers and bankrupt them. You want to make sure they do well. So the life economy is based on a system where you look at long-term benefits, short-term enough to keep going, but long-term benefits. And that means, for example, paying people to clean up all the plastic that's floating around in the ocean and recycle it, and to clean up the environment and whatever.
and in economic terms, John, it's a very important point, isn't it? Because what we're saying when we're in the death economy, we're trying to maximize externalities for others and not pay our way. One of the principles that we have on the Shepheard-Walwyn channel is the importance of you pay for what you use as a principle of economic prosperity.
Right.
And what you're saying there is people paying the full price for everything that's produced. If we're going to use plastics, if we choose to use them, we've got to pay for the cleanup and the safe disposal of them and the cost
Right.
of that, right? And we got to deal
Exactly.
with economic externalities.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to internalize those externalities. That's part of the life economy, yes. And beyond that, paying for people to come up with new technologies that don't ravage the earth. We're in this high-tech era now where we need lithium and copper and gold and rare minerals. But if we're going to mine them, how do we mine them in a way that really protects the environment around them? And how do we come up with new concepts so we can produce energy from the air or the water? Because we know those technologies are possible. We're just on the verge of creating these.
If we take our listeners back to the divide and conquer, what you're talking about there is including others, is not othering someone else. So, for example, if a child is involved in producing my mobile phone, then I've got to be willing to pay for a mobile phone that does not need that child to risk their life to get a precious metal out of the ground, right? So we're
Right.
not got that. I know one of the things that you talked about, I'm going to need to inspire people. You talk about perceptions being perhaps the most important aspect of our existence. I wonder if you can take me through that because I'm going to need that if I'm going to change people's perceptions. But also, how can I help change a collective dream that people are having so that they want to have something that is much more inclusive and more long-term prosperous rather than short-term trinket making? You talk about trinket economics in some of your work, don't you? Um,
Well, I think, Jonathan, we want to look at those four pillars and personalize them. Um, I think we could challenge everybody or offer the opportunity for everybody to look at fear and be able to step beyond fear. How do you step beyond the fear of others? How do you realize that those immigrants, rather than possibly being criminals or threats to you, they're the people cooking your meals in the restaurants. At least here in the United States, they are. And so they're the people that'll help you take care of your garden or cut your trees. They're good neighbors. And there may be criminals amongst them. We can weed them out, but stop fearing them on this generalized basis. Don't fear falling behind. Don't fear speaking out. Don't let yourself be put in this box of, oh my God, it's a scary world out there. Don't feel failure, don't fear success. As a writer, I know a lot of writers, aspiring writers, they're afraid to write first because they're afraid they'll fail. And then maybe if they're not failing, if they found a publisher, then they're kind of afraid of success. No, well, now what do I do? Do I really have to go on a speaking tour? I don't like to speak, so on and so forth. We create these perceptions of fear. And as you said, and as I write, perception creates reality. So when we change our perceptions, we change our actions. And when we change our actions, we change reality. So when we move beyond these different fears, we change the reality. When we stop fearing our neighbors and stop fearing immigrants and see them as good neighbors, suddenly the reality around that whole situation changes. When we stop fearing failure of writing, then we start writing. And when we start, and if we're successful as a writer, but to use this analogy, if we're then fearful of success, I don't want to go on a speaking tour. Well, okay, do something different than convince your publishers that you can do it all by Zoom or whatever. But step beyond. And debt, just don't go into debt. Of you may take certain debts that are entirely reasonable, like if you've got a really good equity in a house or something like that, taking some debt is okay, but don't fall into this debt that you can't repay, and that includes personal debt. Don't fall into the Godfather syndrome, Don Corleone, like you owe me, like I gave you $10,000 for your daughter's wedding. Now you owe me. You got to go out and break this guy's knees because he hasn't paid me, and we'll break yours if you don't pay me. Don't fall into that.
You know,
And scarcity,
the challenge, Johnny, is that young people often there's scarcity created around you will not get a good enough job if you don't go to university. So there's insecurity about insufficiency of job roles, and they go to
yeah,
college and they get themselves into massive debt, and then they can't then get this good job. When I was a kid, I actually had in total my total student debt on graduation was 4,500 UK pounds. And that was purely that I'd chosen to get it because the interest rate was zero. And so I just thought to myself, I'd be crazy not to take free money, genuinely. So I saved it. And then I had it to spend. I thought, well, shall I pay it back? And I thought, well, the interest rate was fine. Today, a student would leave with debts of at least £100,000. And instead of getting a graduate job, I joined a company called Procter and Gamble, one of the world's most respected companies, well, on a high salary. And then other people now, they're looking to get a job in McDonald's as a server rather than as a manager.
Yeah.
And so that we're getting these kids into debt from even before they get into the workplace. They're into hot to an economic hitman in their own country, right?
And meanwhile, at least in the United States, there's a shortage of carpenters and plumbers
Yes, same here.
and health
Absolutely the same here.
and healthcare workers. I have a grandson who's 18 years old. He just graduated from high school. His last year in high school, he started a company. It's a window washing company. Pretty simple
Yeah.
technology, really. He doesn't wash windows, though. He goes around from house to house and gets people to his services. He employs 15 people. This was his senior in high school, and he pays them really well, and he gives them a percentage of at every job they work. Not overall the company, but for every job that they do, he gives them a percentage of the money that comes in from that job. And he just recently went to the Amazon with me in January. And next year he's going to a very good business school. But he said to me, I don't know why I even bother to go to college. I've got this business going. But he said, on the other hand, I know I'm going to learn some good techniques. My accounting's going to improve. The way I handle money and invest is probably going to include, and I'm going to make some really good contacts. I'm going to go to college. And I've encouraged him, stay with businesses like that. And I would encourage everybody get involved in businesses where there's real value. Real value. I think that this idea that you've got to go to college and get a liberal arts education or business education, that's crazy because right now we need a lot more people going to more technical types of schools in healthcare and in things like carpentry and plumbing and welding and so on and so forth.
Well, John, one of the things I thought I would do as leader is use AI to get rid of white collar jobs and inspire people to try and move into those jobs that you talked about there, that we're actually doing what I would describe as a proper job. I grew up in a family, I was the only kid to go to college. My brother was a mechanic, my family of mechanics and engineers, and my mum ran a catering business. So they actually did proper work. My brother would laugh at me and say, "You don't do anything." Because all I did was read books, right, and answer questions, and use AI to do that. So we don't have to worry about the aging population because we can reposition our economy so that a lot of the jobs, and actually a lot of jobs in government that can be AI'd, it's like let's do that, and let's retrain people to get back into jobs so they're being more productive and I think more satisfied, right? But that again, it comes down to what you describe as changing the dream that you have, right? Which I
Well,
think
yeah,
is a very important thing. And especially given what you said right at the beginning of our conversations, is this the whole thing about how bad things look in the UK is helping people see that there's a whole lot of good in our country, and we need to be focusing on that, and then we need to make it better, you know.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, self-criticism for a human being, the only way we get to be better is to look at what we've done wrong and change it. And the same is true for a country as it is for an individual. In the Economic Hitman books, and I go into this in even a lot more detail in a new book that's coming out in this coming September, but it's in the Economic Hitman books. There's 5 questions I suggest that people ask themselves, which which is in line with getting into this life economy. Do you want me to run through those?
Absolutely, I'd love you to. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one is, what do I most want to do for the rest of my life? What'll bring me the greatest satisfaction? And I like to write, so that's my answer. I want to write. I really enjoy writing, but I have a friend who's a carpenter on the other side of the spectrum, and he says, I want to work with my hands in wood. And it's really important. He didn't need to go to college to do that. I didn't actually need to go to college to learn to write. In fact, I found studying English in college hampered me from writing because you had to conform to these things and listen to the teacher. But so it's really important that we do what we most want to do. That's how we are successful, even if it's not the way to make the most money. Money doesn't bring happiness necessarily. The second question is, how do I do this in a way that will help transform the death economy to a life economy? And for a writer, I would say, I'm going to write about these things like I do. I'm going to write things, books that inspire people to get involved in that. And my carpenter friend would say, well, I'm only going to use sustainable materials, this wood frame or in building a house. I'm going to replant trees for every tree I cut. And the third question is, what's stopping me? And so for me as a writer, I could say, well, I had an English teacher that told me that didn't like my writing. And it discouraged me from writing, which actually happened. And my carpenter friend would say, well, my clients are going to say they don't want to pay the extra money for me to use sustainable materials or replant trees. And the fourth question is then that's a perception. When you touch that perception, when you touch that jaguar, that's where that book comes from. Because the indigenous people say if something's holding you back, go on a vision quest and see it as a jaguar standing in your way. And if you run from it, it'll chase you. But if you touch it, it'll give you the energy in a vision quest. And so the fourth question is, how do I change my perception? And so for me as a writer, thinking about this teacher that said, you don't know how to write, I look at him finally and I say, well, he was a highly respected English teacher, but he never published anything that I know of. What position is he in to really criticize my writing? And I did exactly that. And my carpenter friend would say, well, I'm going to tell my clients that the extra price they pay is not a cost for sustainable materials. It's an investment in the future, their children's future. And then the fifth thing is, well, what do I do right now? And I got to write. First, I got to think about what I want to write about. And then the carpenter starts going out there and building with sustainable materials and telling his clients, you're investing in the future. It's going to cost you a little bit more, but it's a better investment than Wall Street. It's a better investment for you and your kids to be taking care of this planet that we live on. And, I think everybody can ask themselves those five questions fairly frequently. The first two you may not change. What do I most want to do, and how do I do this in a way that transforms a death economy to a life economy? They may stay the same for a long time, maybe forever. But three, four, and five are what's holding me back, and how do I change that perception? And the third one, what actions do I take? That's going to change frequently because once I've decided that I'm going to write, I got to decide what to write. And once I've made that decision, I got to decide what's the first sentence. And I actually go through this process very frequently, like 3 or 4 times a week. When I first wake up,
Yeah.
I can do it in a minute, lying in bed. I can just run right through it. Once you've done it a few times, it's very quick and very simple. It just comes to you. So that's a way of each of us looking at what can we contribute to this life economy and at the same time feel deeply fulfilled within ourselves. I mentioned my carpenter friend. He's a lot happier than if he'd ever gone to college and tried to be a corporate executive. He loves what he does, and he does it well, and he's very satisfied with it, and he makes a decent living at it.
Yeah, 100%. There's lots of other questions I've got just about me running as a politician to change society, but I'm conscious of time, John. So let's wrap it up here. Before we wrap up, though, is there anything that you'd like to say to our listeners that you haven't already?
Well, Jonathan, I think we've had a lot of fun today with this play acting, basically, yeah. But I think the biggest message that to give to your listeners would be, I think we should all feel like we live in very, very blessed. We're very blessed. We're blessed to live at this time because this is a huge inflection point in human history. There've been a number of inflection points, but this is perhaps the biggest, where we're challenged with what it really means to be human beings, being human on this planet. We know we have the capacity to destroy nature as we know it. We're in the process of doing it. We know we have the capacity to blow ourselves up with nuclear weapons. We also know we have the capacity to do amazing things, to turn things around. We have the technology, we have the brain power. So we're living at incredible times. And if each one of you listeners can really look at what is it that you most want to do for the rest of your life, and how would you do this in a way that contributes to making the world a better place, allowing us as human beings to fulfill our real potential of what it means to be human beings, being human on this planet. I just think we should all feel incredibly grateful that we're alive right now where we have this opportunity. Um, Go for it.
John, I just absolutely love the sentiment and the specific advice in that. And ladies and gents, do read Confessions of an Economic Hitman. The third edition came out relatively recently, and it's absolutely stunning work. But do also look at John's other work, especially The World as You Dream It and Touching the Jaguar, which John talks about. But John Perkins, it's been an absolute pleasure. And until next time, thank you very much for your contribution and for your time.
It's my pleasure, Jonathan, and thank you for what you do. I really, really appreciate your spreading the word this way. And I guess I should leave one other comment, and that is if people want to find out more about me or those books, they go to johnperkins.org.
Fantastic. Fantastic. That's
Thank you.
johnperkins.org, and that will be in the show notes as well, ladies and gents. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening to the Shepheard-Walwyn podcast. To explore these ideas further, be sure to visit our website, www.shepheard-walwyn.com, and join our mailing list for news and special offers. Check out our authors and buy the books to learn more. And you can also find us on social media. Links are also on the website. And if you like the podcast, please head over to iTunes or Spotify to give us a review. It's surprisingly helpful in getting the ideas out there. So until next time, keep reading